You thought the handcuffs ended the question, Adrian Wallace said beneath the flashing red and blue lights. They only made the answer permanent. Two police badges rested inside clear evidence bags on the hood of a patrol car, shining beneath the cold Maryland rain. Sergeant Eric Dalton stood several feet away, his face emptied of the confidence he had worn only minutes earlier. Officer Kyle Mercer stared toward the wet pavement. Officer Ethan Brooks remained beside his vehicle, his body camera still recording as state police units blocked the highway in both directions. Captain Rebecca Shaw stood near Adrian, while Internal Affairs Director Monica Grant supervised investigators collecting radios, access cards, camera files, and dispatch records. 13 minutes earlier, Dalton had believed the black man before him was alone, powerless, and easy to control. Now every changing explanation and every rejected piece of evidence had become part of an official record. Adrian looked from the sealed badges to the officers who had worn them. His dark overcoat was wet, but his voice remained steady. Authority does not become lawful simply because no one challenges it, he said. Dalton tried to respond, but Monica raised one hand. The time for improvised explanations was over. 13 minutes earlier, Adrian had been driving alone along a quiet highway outside a small Maryland town. Rain moved across the windshield of his unmarked black sport utility vehicle, and the road ahead reflected the pale glow of scattered streetlights. He had just left a confidential oversight meeting concerning repeated complaints against a local patrol unit. Black drivers had described stops without clear cause, reasons that changed after questioning, and reports that did not match recorded evidence. A sealed folder rested on the passenger seat. Inside were dates, statements, and 3 names that appeared more than once: Eric Dalton, Kyle Mercer, and Ethan Brooks. Adrian wore a charcoal suit beneath his coat. No uniform, no visible badge. Nothing announced that he was the state police chief. He was not conducting an undercover operation. He was simply returning from the meeting without an escort when he noticed a patrol car following him. It stayed behind him through one intersection, then a second, then a third. Adrian maintained 45 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. He signaled before every turn and kept both hands visible on the wheel. Still, the patrol car moved closer until its headlights filled his rearview mirror. Then the emergency lights appeared. Adrian slowed, signaled, and pulled onto the shoulder beneath a street lamp. He placed the vehicle in park, lowered the window, and waited with both hands on the steering wheel. Sergeant Dalton approached with one hand near his radio. He looked at Adrian before looking at the dashboard or license plate. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Dalton asked. Adrian answered evenly. "No, Sergeant. Please state the reason." Dalton paused. "You were driving too slowly." Adrian glanced toward the speedometer. "I was traveling at the posted limit." Dalton's expression tightened. "License and registration." Adrian reached carefully toward his wallet. "Is slow driving the official reason for the stop?" Dalton looked briefly at his body camera. "Your plate also came back unclear." Adrian handed over his documents and watched the officer avoid reading them. The reason had already changed. "Please state one official reason for the record," Adrian said. Dalton stared at him. "Step out of the vehicle." Adrian remained calm. "Am I being detained?" Dalton leaned closer to the open window. "You are being given an instruction." Adrian looked directly toward the blinking camera on Dalton's chest. "Then let the camera remember what happens next." Adrian opened the door slowly and stepped onto the wet shoulder with both hands visible. Dalton moved back just enough to keep distance, watching him with the rigid suspicion of a man waiting for resistance that never came. Rain gathered along Adrian's overcoat and traced narrow lines toward the pavement. "Stand near the front of the vehicle," Dalton ordered. Adrian complied and positioned himself beneath the street lamp. "For the record," he said, looking toward the body camera, "I provided a valid license and registration, and the stated reason for the stop has changed." Dalton's jaw tightened. "You do not control the record." "No," Adrian replied. "The evidence does." Dalton turned toward his patrol car and used the radio to request another unit. His report was brief and carefully incomplete. He described a suspicious driver with questionable documentation, but he did not mention that Adrian had followed every instruction, driven at the posted limit, or provided documents matching the vehicle. Adrian listened without interruption. He had read similar language in the complaints inside the sealed folder. A request for clarity became defiance. A calm question became attitude. A valid document became suspicious because the officer had already decided the person holding it did not belong. Dalton returned with Adrian's license still in his hand. The registration does not match the vehicle classification, he said. Adrian looked toward the black sport utility vehicle. You said the plate came back unclear. Dalton's eyes narrowed. It returned a restricted designation. Then contact the agency attached to that designation. Dalton ignored the request and looked through the passenger window. The sealed folder on the seat carried an official state police marking. What is in the folder? Confidential state material. Dalton gave a short laugh. According to you. Adrian reached carefully into his coat and removed his state police identification. He held it forward without stepping closer. Verify this through the State Police Communications Center. Dalton took the card and glanced at it. The photograph matched. The identification number was current. The words Executive Command were visible beneath the state seal. Still, Dalton returned it without making the call. This could be outdated. Adrian placed the card back into his pocket. Then verification will resolve that. Dalton looked toward the blinking camera on his chest. I decide what requires verification. Headlights approached from behind, and a second patrol car pulled onto the shoulder. Officer Ethan Brooks stepped out and walked toward them through the ring. What do we have? He asked. Dalton answered before Adrian could speak. Possible false identification and a vehicle with restricted registration. Ethan looked at Adrian, then at the documents in Dalton's hand. Did dispatch confirm a problem? Dalton motioned toward the second patrol car. Run the plate again. Ethan returned to his mobile data terminal and entered the number. The screen lit his face. A few seconds later, his posture changed. He read the result twice, then looked through the windshield toward Adrian. Dalton approached the open window. What does it say? Ethan lowered his voice. The registration is valid. The vehicle is assigned to the State Police Executive Fleet. Dalton leaned closer. Anything else? Ethan looked back at the screen. The identification number returns as Active Executive Command. Dalton's expression hardened. Do not broadcast that. Ethan turned toward him. Why not? Dalton glanced at Adrian beneath the street lamp. Because we have not confirmed who he is. Adrian heard every word. He turned slightly toward Ethan's body camera and spoke with deliberate clarity. My vehicle has been verified. My identification has been verified. I am requesting a supervisor. Ethan looked toward Dalton. Dalton looked away. Then another set of headlights appeared through the rain, and a third patrol car approached the shoulder as Officer Kyle Mercer arrived to support a version of events that was already beginning to fail. Mercer parked behind Ethan's patrol car and approached with his rain jacket open, one hand resting near his radio. He looked first at Dalton, then at Adrian, as though the order of those glances had already decided whose account mattered. What is the situation? He asked. Dalton answered quickly. Restricted vehicle, questionable credentials, possible impersonation. Ethan stepped away from his mobile terminal. The registration is valid, and the identification returns as Active Executive Command. Mercer looked toward the black sport utility vehicle. That does not prove he is authorized to have it. Adrian remained beneath the street lamp with his hands visible. My license matches the registration. My photograph matches the identification. The state police system confirms active status. I have requested a supervisor. Mercer studied him for a moment, then looked through the passenger window at the sealed folder. We need to inspect that. No, Adrian said. His tone did not rise. The folder contains confidential state material. You may secure the vehicle and contact the issuing agency, but you may not open it without lawful authority. Dalton took one step closer. You are not in a position to give instructions. Adrian looked directly toward the blinking body camera. I am stating the limits of consent. Rain tapped against the patrol car roofs. Ethan shifted his weight and glanced toward Dalton. Sergeant, we should call the State Police Communications Center. The system provides a verification number. Dalton ignored him. Did you turn your camera on when you arrived? It activated with the emergency lights. Mercer's eyes moved to Ethan's chest. Turn it off until we know what this is. Ethan looked at him. It is already part of the record. For a second, no one spoke. The refusal was quiet, but it changed the balance between the three officers. Dalton turned back toward Adrian. Where did you get the vehicle? It was assigned to me by the Maryland State Police. In what capacity? Adrian held his gaze. Verify my identification. Dalton gave a short, humorless smile. People buy convincing credentials every day. Ethan stepped forward. The identification number is not only valid. It is connected to the executive command system. Mercer lowered his voice. Do not repeat that over the radio. Adrian heard him clearly. Officer Brooks, he said, please state the system result for your body camera. Ethan hesitated. Dalton stared at him. Then Ethan faced Adrian. The vehicle registration is valid. The identification is active. Both return a restricted executive command designation. Dalton reached for his radio. Dispatch, show 1 detained pending investigation for possible impersonation. Ethan looked sharply at him. We have confirmation. We have a designation, Dalton replied. Not confirmation of the person. Adrian spoke before the radio transmission ended. My photograph matches. My license matches. My vehicle matches. My supervisor. Request remains unanswered. Mercer moved beside Dalton. We can sort it out at the station. Adrian looked from one officer to the next. He recognized the pattern now, not from personal fear, but from the statements inside the folder. Every proof had been transformed into another excuse. Every question had been treated as resistance. Dalton nodded toward Mercer. Place him in handcuffs. Ethan stepped forward. Sergeant, there is no reason to do that. Dalton's voice became colder. That is an order. Adrian did not argue. He turned slowly, keeping his movements visible to every camera. For the record, he said, I am complying. My license is valid. My vehicle is verified. My identification is active. I requested a supervisor. Mercer closed the handcuffs without force. The small metallic sound cut through the ring. Adrian looked toward Dalton's camera. That is what every person in those complaints was told. Dalton's expression changed. What complaints? Adrian faced forward beneath the street lamp. The ones you should have taken seriously before tonight. Adrian stood beside the patrol car with his hands secured behind him, his posture straight and his breathing controlled. Dalton began speaking toward his body camera as though the words alone could reshape what had happened. Subject displayed questionable credentials, refused to explain possession of a restricted vehicle, and became increasingly uncooperative. Ethan looked at him in disbelief. He answered every question. Dalton did not acknowledge him. Officer Brooks, return to your vehicle. Ethan remained where he was. The camera shows that he cooperated. Mercer moved closer to Ethan. This is not the time. Adrian turned his head slightly toward the blinking light on Ethan's chest. It is exactly the time. Dalton stepped into Adrian's line of sight. You should be more concerned about yourself. Adrian met his gaze. I am concerned about the record. A sedan passed slowly in the nearest lane, its tires sending a light spray across the shoulder. The driver looked toward the 3 patrol cars, the flashing lights, and the black man standing in handcuffs beneath the street lamp. Dalton watched. The vehicle continued down the highway. People see what they want to see, he said. Adrian answered quietly. That is why evidence matters. Ethan returned to his mobile terminal and checked the screen again. The same restricted command designation remained displayed. He reached for the radio. Dalton noticed. What are you doing? Calling the verification number. I told you not to broadcast it. I am not broadcasting it. I am confirming it. Mercer stepped toward the open patrol car door. Ethan, close the terminal. Ethan looked back at him. Why? Mercer's voice dropped. Because this can still be handled locally. Adrian heard the sentence and understood its meaning. Handling it locally meant keeping the explanation inside the same small circle that had created it. Ethan pressed the call button before either officer could stop him. State Police Communications, this is Local Unit 14 requesting verification of a restricted executive vehicle and active identification. Static answered first. Then a dispatcher asked for the identification number. Ethan read it carefully. Dalton turned away, his face hardening as the seconds passed. Adrian remained still. He did not ask Ethan to hurry. He did not announce his rank. The process was finally moving where it should have moved from the beginning. The dispatcher returned. Unit 14, hold your position. Do not transport the detained individual. State Police Command personnel are responding. Ethan looked toward Adrian. Mercer reached for his own radio. Can you confirm the identity? The dispatcher paused. Negative over an open channel. Maintain the scene and preserve all recordings. Dalton stepped closer to Ethan. Tell them there is no emergency. Ethan shook his head. They already heard the request. Adrian spoke toward the nearest camera. The system verified my vehicle before I was handcuffed. The system verified my identification before I was handcuffed. A supervisor was requested before I was handcuffed. Dalton pointed toward him. Stop making statements. Adrian's voice remained calm. You are free to stop asking questions. You are not free to erase answers. The rain softened, but the red and blue lights kept moving across the wet road. In the distance, another set of emergency lights appeared beyond the curve, then another behind it. Mercer stared toward them. How many units did they send? Ethan did not answer. Dalton looked at Adrian as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Who are you? Adrian held his gaze. The same man I was when you decided my documents were not enough. The approaching vehicles slowed and moved onto the shoulder in precise formation. Their markings were unmistakable. Maryland State Police. A command vehicle stopped at the front of the scene. The driver's door opened, and Captain Rebecca Shaw stepped into the rain. Captain Rebecca Shaw stepped away from the command vehicle and took in the scene with one measured glance. 3 local patrol cars. 1 unmarked state police vehicle. A sealed folder visible on the passenger seat. Adrian standing beneath the street lamp with his hands secured behind him. Her expression did not change, but the atmosphere around the officers did. Dalton moved toward her quickly. Captain, we have a possible impersonation case involving restricted credentials. Rebecca did not look at him. Her attention remained on Adrian. Release Chief Wallace. The words were calm. They did not need to be loud. Mercer stared at her. Ethan's eyes shifted toward Dalton. For the first time that night, no one moved until Rebecca repeated the order. Remove the handcuffs from the state police chief. Mercer stepped behind Adrian and unlocked them. Adrian brought his hands forward slowly, then adjusted the sleeves of his wet overcoat. He did not look relieved. He looked exactly as he had when the stop began, controlled, observant, and fully aware of every camera recording the moment. Dalton glanced from Rebecca to Adrian. He never identified himself as the chief. Adrian turned toward him. I provided active state police identification. I requested verification. I requested a supervisor. My rank was not required for you to follow procedure. Another vehicle stopped behind Rebecca's command unit. Internal Affairs Director Monica Grant stepped out carrying a weatherproof case. 2 investigators followed her, each wearing body cameras of their own. Monica approached Rebecca, then looked at Adrian. Chief, are you all right? I am able to continue, Adrian replied. Preserve the scene before anyone discusses what happened. Monica nodded immediately. All local officers will keep their body cameras active. No reports will be revised, deleted, or completed until the electronic evidence is secured. Radios, mobile terminals, dispatch logs, and vehicle data will be collected under independent supervision. Dalton looked offended. Independent supervision? This was a lawful stop. Ethan spoke before Rebecca could answer. The registration and identification were confirmed before he was detained. Dalton turned toward him. That is not the full context. Ethan looked at the blinking light on his chest. The full context is recorded. Monica faced the 3 officers. No one will coordinate statements. Each of you will be interviewed separately after the evidence is preserved. Mercer looked toward the black sport utility vehicle. There is confidential material inside. We were trying to determine whether he had legal possession of it. Adrian answered with quiet precision. You were told how to verify the vehicle. You were shown identification matching the driver and registration. You were given a direct method to contact state police communications. You chose not to use it until Officer Brooks did. Rebecca stepped toward Dalton. What was the original reason for the stop? Dalton paused. The vehicle was moving unusually slowly. Ethan looked down. Mercer said nothing. Rebecca continued. What was the second reason? Dalton's eyes hardened. The plate returned unclear. And after the registration returned valid? Dalton looked toward Adrian. The restricted designation raised concerns. Monica opened the weatherproof case and removed evidence bags. Concerns are documented. Changing explanations are also documented. She directed an investigator to photograph the mobile terminal before disconnecting it. Another investigator copied the body camera identifiers and radio unit numbers. The roadside was no longer a place where Dalton controlled the narrative. It had become an evidence scene. Adrian walked to the passenger side of his vehicle and looked through the glass at the sealed folder. The names in that file belonged to people who said their documents were ignored, their explanations were rewritten, and their complaints disappeared into the same system that created them. Dalton's face tightened. Are you saying this was some kind of test? No, Adrian said. I was driving home from a confidential meeting. You created the test yourselves. Monica looked toward Rebecca, then back at the local officers. Sergeant Dalton and Officer Mercer, surrender your badges, access cards, and department-issued devices pending review. Dalton stared at her. Over one stop. Adrian met his gaze beneath the fading rain. No, the review is beginning because one stop may have confirmed a pattern. Cole stared at Monica Grant as though the order itself had crossed an invisible line. For years, his badge had ended questions before they were fully asked. Now an internal affairs director stood in the rain and waited for him to surrender it. Mercer looked toward Cole for direction, but the sergeant had none left to give. Rebecca Shaw remained beside Adrian, her posture calm and exact. Ethan's body camera continued blinking, preserving every hesitation. Pending independent review, Monica said, your badges, access cards, and department-issued devices will be secured. This is an administrative action, not a final finding. Cole's face tightened. We followed procedure. Ethan looked at him. No, we did not. The words changed the roadside more than the arrival of the state police vehicles had. Mercer turned sharply. Think carefully about what you are saying. Ethan held his gaze. I have been thinking about what I did not say. Rain moved across the pavement in silver lines. Adrian watched the younger officer without interrupting. Ethan had followed orders. He had seen the reasons for the stop change. He had watched valid records get ignored. He had remained silent until the truth became impossible to deny. Speaking now did not erase that silence, but it created the first honest moment among the three local officers. Cole stepped closer to him. We can explain the inconsistencies in the report. Monica raised one hand. There will be no shared explanation. Each officer will provide an independent statement after representation procedures are explained. Mercer glanced toward his body camera. Mine stopped recording earlier. Ethan turned toward him. You told me to turn mine off. Mercer's expression hardened. That is not what I said. The recording will show what you said. Monica instructed an investigator to secure Mercer's camera immediately and document its operating history. Another supervisor collected Cole's radio and access card. Cole finally removed his badge and placed it into a clear evidence bag. Mercer followed several seconds later, moving with the reluctance of a man who had believed consequences belonged only to other people. The sealed bags were placed on the hood of the patrol car beneath the red and blue lights. Adrian looked at the two badges through the clear plastic. They appeared smaller there, separated from uniforms, titles, and unquestioned authority. Ethan looked down at his own badge. Chief Wallace, I should have spoken sooner. Adrian met his eyes. Yes, you should have. Ethan accepted the answer without defense. Adrian continued. Telling the truth late is not the same as telling it on time, but it is where accountability can begin. Monica informed Ethan that he would be placed on administrative assignment while his conduct and cooperation were reviewed separately. Cole looked toward Adrian. So he keeps his badge because he turned against us? Adrian's voice remained level. He does not avoid responsibility because he finally told the truth. Cooperation will be considered, but so will every moment he chose silence. Rebecca opened the rear door of her command vehicle and offered Adrian a dry coat. He declined with a slight shake of his head. There are people in that file who stood in weather like this longer than I did. Monica looked through the passenger window at the sealed folder. The investigation was already active before tonight, correct? Adrian nodded. The stop did not create the case. It may have confirmed why the case exists. Cole's eyes moved toward the vehicle. He finally understood that the man he had detained had been reviewing complaints connected to his unit before the patrol lights ever appeared behind him. Adrian turned toward the officers. This is not about one bad decision, he said. It is about whether the same decision was repeated until misconduct became routine. He looked at the two badges resting on the hood. You thought the handcuffs ended the question. They only made the answer permanent. The sealed badges remained on the hood while Monica Grant directed the investigation with the precision of someone who understood how quickly a false story could become permanent once it entered an official report. Each body camera was secured separately. Each radio transmission was copied directly from the communication system. The mobile data terminals were photographed before any screen was closed. Dalton watched the process with growing frustration, but he no longer controlled the scene. Mercer stood several feet away with his hands empty, his confidence thinning beneath the steady red and blue lights. Ethan remained near the second patrol car with a state police supervisor beside him, preparing to give an independent statement. Adrian stood near his sport utility vehicle and watched the truth separate itself from the version Dalton had tried to create. Monica approached with a preliminary evidence sheet protected beneath a clear cover. "Chief Wallace, the timestamps confirm that your vehicle and identification were verified before the detention," she said. The stated reason for the stop changed at least 3 times. Adrian looked toward Dalton. "How much time passed between verification and the handcuffs?" "Nearly 4 minutes." Adrian's expression remained controlled. 4 minutes is a long time when uncertainty has already ended. Rebecca Shaw lowered her eyes toward the sealed folder on the passenger seat. "Then this was not a verification failure." Monica nodded. "It appears to have been a decision to disregard verification." Ethan stepped closer. "Director Grant, there is more." Dalton turned toward him. "You need representation before you say anything else." Monica faced Dalton. "He will be advised of his rights and procedures. You will not advise him what to remember." Ethan took a breath. This was not the first time the reason for a stop changed after the driver questioned it. Mercer looked at him sharply. "You are trying to save yourself." "No," Ethan said. "I am finally describing what I saw." Rainwater moved along the edge of the patrol car hood and gathered beneath the evidence bags. Ethan continued. "There were reports where the body camera did not match the written explanation. Sometimes the original reason was removed before the report was submitted." Monica opened her notebook. "How many reports?" Ethan hesitated. "I know of 6. The number settled over the roadside with greater weight than any accusation. 6 reports meant 6 people whose lives might have been shaped by words written after the truth had already been recorded." Adrian did not look satisfied. He looked toward the folder that had brought him to the confidential meeting. "Were those drivers from the complaint files?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Some of them. Were most of them black?" Ethan looked down. "Yes." Dalton shook his head. "That proves nothing. We patrol the same neighborhoods every night." Adrian turned toward him. "A pattern does not disappear because each incident has been given a separate excuse." Mercer moved closer to Dalton. "We should not continue without counsel." Monica nodded. "You will not be questioned further tonight. You will also be transported separately, and you will not coordinate statements." She instructed the investigators to preserve every report connected to the 6 stops Ethan identified. Original versions, edited versions, camera files, dispatch entries, and supervisor approvals would all be reviewed. Adrian then faced Ethan. "Why did you stay silent?" Ethan looked toward the flashing lights reflected in the dark window of the patrol car. "Because I thought speaking up would make me the problem." Adrian's voice remained quiet. "And what did silence make you?" Ethan took several seconds before answering. "Part of it. The admission did not make him innocent. It made him honest enough to begin being accountable." Adrian nodded once. "Then, your statement must include every time you remained silent, not only every time they acted." Ethan agreed. As Dalton and Mercer were escorted towards separate vehicles, Dalton looked back at Adrian. "You are going to destroy our careers over 13 minutes. Adrian met his gaze across the wet pavement. "No, Sergeant. The investigation will determine what your careers were built on long before those 13 minutes began." The vehicles carrying Dalton and Mercer disappeared beyond the curve, leaving the roadside quieter but no less serious. The red and blue lights continued moving across the wet pavement while investigators completed the first evidence inventory. Monica Grant stood beside the hood of the patrol car and watched an investigator seal the 2 badges into separate containers. Each bag received a time, location, evidence number, and witness signature. Nothing would depend on memory alone. Rebecca Shaw reviewed the communications log from Ethan's patrol car. "The verification request was entered 4 minutes before the detention," she said. The dispatcher also recorded that Sergeant Dalton instructed the unit not to broadcast the executive designation. Monica looked toward Ethan. "Did he explain why?" Ethan stood beneath the edge of an open vehicle door while rainwater fell from the roof in steady drops. He said the driver might be using stolen credentials. Adrian remained near his black sport utility vehicle. "Was there any report that the vehicle had been stolen?" "No," Ethan replied. "Any mismatch between the license, registration, photograph, and identification? No, Adrian nodded once. The answers were simple. The decision to ignore them had not been. Monica instructed the investigators to place an immediate preservation hold on every report, camera file, dispatch entry, and terminal search connected to Dalton and Mercer during the previous 3 years. No local supervisor would be permitted to alter, replace, or remove a record. Rebecca added a second order requiring an outside review of every complaint involving changing stop reasons, interrupted cameras, or disputed identification. Ethan looked toward the sealed folder on Adrian's passenger seat. Some of those complaints were closed before anyone reviewed the full recordings. Monica's attention sharpened. How do you know? I saw supervisors read the written reports and stop there. If the report said the driver was uncooperative, the camera was treated like supporting material instead of primary evidence. Adrian looked through the rain toward the empty highway. He imagined the people behind those reports waiting for letters that told them their concerns could not be confirmed. Some had probably wondered whether they had remembered the event incorrectly. Others had learned that telling the truth was not always enough when the system preferred a cleaner version. Contact every complainant, Adrian said. Tell them their cases are being independently reviewed. Do not promise an outcome. Do not pressure anyone to participate. Give them a direct number outside the local chain of command. Monica wrote the instruction into the official incident log. That will expand the investigation significantly. Then let it expand, Adrian replied. A narrow review would only protect the pattern. Ethan lowered his eyes. Chief Wallace, I can identify other officers who knew the reports were being changed. Adrian faced him. You will give those names in a formal statement with representation present. You will separate what you witnessed from what you heard. Accuracy matters more than speed. Ethan nodded. He had expected anger. What he received was a standard, and somehow that was harder to escape. Rebecca approached Adrian with a dry coat once more. This time he accepted it, not because the rain had become colder, but because the evidence had been secured and the scene no longer required his presence at the center. He placed the coat over his shoulders and looked at Monica. This investigation cannot be framed as officers mistreating the wrong person. Monica understood immediately. Because rank is not the issue. Correct, Adrian said. The stop was not wrong because I could summon command personnel. It was wrong because every person deserves lawful treatment before anyone discovers who they are. Behind them, an investigator closed the final evidence container. The click was quiet, almost ordinary. Yet it marked the moment when the officer's version stopped controlling the case. The truth no longer depended on who wore the badge. It had entered the record on its own. 6 months later, the highway stop had become only the first page of a much larger record. Independent investigators reviewed 3 years of body camera footage, dispatch logs, mobile terminal searches, written reports, and complaint files connected to Dalton and Mercer. 42 traffic stops received renewed examination. 11 reports contained major inconsistencies. 7 drivers had presented valid identification that officers described as questionable or incomplete. Most were black men traveling through neighborhoods where someone had decided they did not belong. The investigation also found that original stop reasons had been changed after recordings were uploaded, while several complaints had been closed without a complete review of the available evidence. Dalton and Mercer were removed from service following separate administrative proceedings that found repeated dishonesty, improper detention practices, and attempts to interfere with recorded evidence. Their cases were referred to the appropriate state authorities for additional review. Ethan served a formal suspension before returning under strict supervision. He completed ethics training, testified in every reopened case connected to his knowledge, and accepted that cooperation could reduce uncertainty without erasing responsibility. On a clear Saturday morning, Adrian entered the Maryland State Police Training Academy without an escort. A new class of recruits sat before him in pressed uniforms, their badges not yet issued. Along the rear wall sat several people whose complaints had been reopened: a high school teacher, an auto mechanic, a college student, and a father who had been stopped while returning from his daughter's school performance. Adrian did not stand on the raised platform. He stood at floor level beside them. Some of you have heard what happened on that highway, he began. You may believe the lesson is to be careful because the person you stop could hold a powerful position. The room became still. Adrian looked toward the complainants. That is the wrong lesson. He paused beside an empty display case where the recruits would eventually receive their badges. The law did not become important because the detained man was the state police chief. It was important every time an officer stopped someone who had no title, no command vehicle, and no direct line to people who could force the truth into the open. A recruit in the first row slowly lowered his pen. Adrian continued. A badge does not tell the public who must surrender their dignity. It tells the officer who must remain accountable. Your character will be tested most when you believe no supervisor is watching and no influential person will challenge your version. After the session, the reopened complainants met with investigators in a nearby conference room. Improper citations were withdrawn. Official findings were corrected. Written apologies were issued. New policies required supervisory review whenever the stated reason for a stop changed, whenever a camera stopped unexpectedly, or whenever a written report conflicted with electronic records. Outside the academy, Ethan waited near the stone steps. "Chief Wallace," he said, "I used to think loyalty meant protecting the officers beside me." Adrian studied him for a moment. Loyalty to the uniform means protecting what it represents, even from the person wearing it. Ethan nodded. There was no easy forgiveness in the answer. Only a responsibility he would have to prove every day. Adrian walked toward the parking lot, where the black sport utility vehicle from that rainy night waited beneath the morning sun. Months earlier, 2 officers had believed handcuffs could silence one black man. Instead, they had locked years of misconduct into a record that truth finally had the power to open.